Rama, 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 Hare Rama. Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Krishna, Hare, 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 Rama. Oh, okay. It's time. Devotees, this is our session number 38 of Bhakti Vaibhava seminar, Srimad Bhagavatam. So, welcome. Hope you had a nice Krishna Janmastami and Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja. And we are right at the end of chapter 9 of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the passing away of Bhishma Deva in the presence of Lord Krishna. And we're just going to start section E, the fifth section, which we've titled The Scene Following the Departure of Bhishma. It's from verse 44 to verse 49. So first of all, our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadesha Tarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkalpatarubhyascha kripas sindubhya evacha. Paditanam pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Right, so here we are, devotees. From verse 44 to verse 49. And first of all, let us read the translations to the verses. 44. Knowing that Bhishma Deva had merged into the unlimited eternity of the Supreme Absolute, all present there became silent like birds at the end of the day. 45. Thereafter, both men and demigods sounded drums in honor, and the honest royal order commenced demonstrations of honor and respect. And from the sky fell showers of flowers. Because Bhishma Deva, he's just passed away. That was in verse 43, the last verse in the previous section. Bhishma Deva left his body, went back to Godhead. 46. O descendant of Bhrigu, Shonaka, after performing funeral rites for the dead body of Bhishma Deva, Maharaj Yudhisthira was momentarily overtaken with grief. 47. All the great sages then glorified Lord Sri Krishna, who was present there, by confidential Vedic hymns. Then all of them returned to their respective hermitages, bearing always Lord Krishna within their hearts. Verse 48. Thereafter, Maharaj Yudhisthira at once went to his capital, Hastinapur, accompanied by Lord Sri Krishna, and there he consoled his uncle and aunt, Gandhari, who was an ascetic. And verse 49. After this, the great religious king, Maharaj Yudhisthira, executed the royal power in the kingdom strictly according to the codes of royal principles approved by his uncle and confirmed by Lord Sri Krishna. Okay, so there we go, devotees. Here's the translation again. Verse 44, knowing that Bhishma Dev had merged into the unlimited eternity of the Supreme Absolute, all present there became silent, like birds at the end of the day. So, okay, let's have a look at the purport. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Yeah, there's mainly one paragraph, but there's a bit of a short second paragraph too. So anyway, so Srila Prabhupada explains an important point in the purport, that where it says here that Bhishma Dev had merged into the unlimited eternity of the Supreme Absolute, it means actually he went back to Godhead, to the original home of the living being. Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada explains our natures. We're all part and parcel of the Lord, although at the moment we're disconnected like parts of a machine. And like parts of a machine, when they come out of the machine, then they're useless. Yes. So similarly, we become useless. It's just interesting to think of it in that way, isn't it? Just useless. I mean, worse than useless, because useless means you're just like a zero. But we become dangers to ourselves and to everybody else, so we become like minuses. It's really true. So, anyway, Prabhupada gets into a whole description of life here in the material world. Material energy is called Durga Shakti. She is the superintendent of the prison house, Durga Devi. And she takes charge of the disintegrated parts and parcels. Yeah. So, and in this way, they experience life on the material platform. Oh my gosh. So, but after some time, when the living entity, Prabhupada explains, when the living entity gets woken up at least a little bit, then the living entity tries to go back home, back to Godhead. And a spiritual urge within the heart is awakened. And Prabhupada says this spiritual urge is called Brahma Jigyasa, or inquiry about Brahman. So, yeah. And Prabhupada then talks about success in this Brahma Jigyas. That success in it means knowledge, renunciation, and devotional service to the Lord. And then Prabhupada explains what that knowledge means, what the renunciation means. And of course, devotional service, that's easy to understand. But when Prabhupada says that knowledge means knowledge of everything of Brahman, the Supreme, he means Krishna. He's referring to Krishna. Yes. Everything of Brahman, the supreme. And renunciation means a detachment from anything which isn't connected to Krishna. And devotional service, that's the revival of our natural state, our natural condition, what we do in our original position. So, yeah, I mean, the Jnanis, I said it means knowledge of Brahma, of Krishna. Prabhupada's applying it in the sort of strict form that Jnanis and yogis enter into the impersonal rays, but the devotees go to Vaikuntha, and there they live with the Lord in whatever is their natural rasa. And in this way, they have full freedom and happiness with the Lord, whereas the impersonal Jnanis and yogis, they enter into the Brahmajyoti. And the Brahmajyoti, Prabhupada explains, is the rays of those Vaikuntha planets. Yeah. They're self-illuminating like the sun. So the Brahmajyoti is spread unlimitedly, and the material world is but a covered portion of an insignificant part of the same Brahmajyoti. So this covering is temporary. Wow. And therefore it's a sort of illusion. So then we go on to the second paragraph, and there Srila Prabhupada makes a couple of points. So the thing is, Bhishma Deva was a pure devotee of the Lord, in a particular mood, of course, as we read last week. So he went to one of the Vaikuntha planets where the Lord is present as Parthasarathi. Yeah. And he's therefore in that planet. Parthasarathi is just the presiding deity of that whole Vaikuntha planet. And yes, so Bhishma Deva, of course, he achieved great love and affection for the Lord, and that Prabhupada says that sort of love binds the Lord and the devotee, and Bhishma never forgot the Lord as Parthasarathi. So, sooner or later, probably more later than sooner, we'll also become awakened like that to some particular feature of Krishna in one of the particular rasas. And then, that means our eternal nature's becoming awakened, reawakened. And then gradually we'll become more and more attached to that particular form of the Lord. And then in due course, when we reach the point that Bhishma just reached of leaving the body, passing away, then we'll go to wherever that particular form of the Lord is, and we'll be with him eternally. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur makes, what a point, listen to this. He says that at that point when Bhishma Dev went back to Godhead, at that very moment, in an invisible form, Bhishma entered a fight with Krishna. who is holding the chariot wheel in his hand. And that's what they're doing. They fight. That's their relationship. Okay. So then we move on to verse 45. Thereafter both men and demigods sounded drums in honor, and the honest royal order commenced demonstrations of honor and respect. And from the sky fell showers of flowers. So yes, there's a purport here, just one paragraph. So as Prabhupada explaining, or just sort of a little bit paraphrasing the verse, he makes the point, as stated in the verse, that when all of this happened, Bhishma Dev just left his body, then both men and demigods, just people from all over the universe, sounded drums in order, and the royal order commenced demonstrations of honor and respect. From the sky means from the demigods came showers of flowers. So this is what Prabhupada explains here. He was respected so much. And Prabhupada talks about the different planetary systems. And Bhishma Dev was known in all the planetary systems. Bhuvaswa. He's known as a great warrior and devotee. And as one of the Mahajans. He was known throughout the whole universe, at least in the where there are devotee communities. They all know Bhishma, Mahajan. So therefore, as Prabhupada said, he was on the level of Brahma, Narada, and Shiva as a person. Yeah, just really, really special person. And that qualification, Prabhupada says, on a par with the demigods, is only possible by achieving spiritual perfection, Prabhupada says. So, yes, so they showered flowers, the demigods showered flowers, and that's a sign of recognition from the demigods, of course. And Prabhupada makes the point, should never be compared to the decoration of a dead body, really, yeah. Of course, when devotees pass away, then we put tilak on, and we put garlands from the deities, and we do things of that sort. But that's different from what people do, just ordinary people, when their ordinary relatives and friends pass away. And yeah. So Bhishma's body was spiritualized, and Prabhupada makes the point that the body of such self-realized devotees should never be thought of as material. And he makes the point that the practice of having so-called Jayanti ceremonies for ordinary people, no matter how prominent or, perceived, thought to be special they are on the material platform, it's Prabhupada says, it's actually an offense. How's that? Gandhi Jayanti. Aparad hai. Yeah, really. It's an offense to the Lord, because the term Jayanti is reserved for the day when the Lord appears on the earth. Yeah. Krishna Jayanti. So to use it for just the ordinary people, it's an aparad. So Bhishma was unique, and his passing away was unique. Translation, verse 46. O descendant of Bhrigu, Shonaka, after performing funeral rituals for the dead body of Bhishma Dev, Maharaj Yudhisthira was momentarily overtaken with grief. So yeah, because Bhishma, Prabhupada explains, he wasn't just a senior family member or family head, something like that for Yudhisthira, but he was a great philosopher and a friend. And what he did for them when they were young, oh, it's amazing. He was the one who kept them alive and helped them to develop and become qualified. That was Bhishma. Yeah, he looked after them, he looked after Kunti. Yes. So, Dhritarashtra, being the uncle, and sort of taking the role, he was meant to temporarily rule until Yudhisthira was old enough. So he should have looked after them nicely, but he didn't, so Bhishma did. Of course, if Dhritarashtra had actually looked after them properly, Bhishma Dev would have helped. But under the circumstances, Dhritarashtra was just hopeless. So many problems were there from the side of Dhritarashtra. So Bhishma, when everyone came to see Bhishma depart, Bhishma was really happy seeing Yudhisthira become emperor. Yeah. And that he was waiting for that. Otherwise, Prabhupada says, otherwise he would have long ago quitted his material body. Yeah. But he didn't. He stayed alive to help Maharaj Yudhisthira and the Pandavas. He was just waiting for that time. And he knew it would come because he knew Krishna was their protector. So Prabhupada continues, he was a devotee, of course, he was a devotee, and devotees know that, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, what verse? 31. That the devotee cannot be vanquished. So he knew it was going to happen, that Yudhisthira and his brothers would be victorious. Yes, that's right. Right. So Bhishma knew that. It's inevitable that it happens. So instead of giving up his body, having to face all these difficulties, he remained alive until that time. Then he felt his mission was over and went back to Godhead. So anyway, now Bhishma's gone. Yudhisthira's feeling separation. And interesting point that seeing Bhishma Dev had no children. He never married, he had no children. So therefore the eldest grandson, Yudhisthira, did the funeral ceremony. Yeah. And it was great. It was really good for Bhishma that such a person did his last rites. So verse 47. All the great sages then glorified Lord Sri Krishna, who was present there, by confidential Vedic hymns. Then all of them returned to their respective hermitages, bearing always Lord Krishna within their hearts. So, again, there's sort of a shortish purport, fairly short. So, anyway, Prabhupada makes the point. The devotees are in the heart of the Lord. The Lord is in the heart of the devotees. It's a very sweet relationship. Yes. So those sages glorified the Lord. And it was very nice. And Prabhupada explains how it works for the devotees, at least the advanced devotees. Due to their love and devotion, pure love and devotion, they always see him within themselves. Premanjana charita bhakti velochanena santasadaiva hridayeshu velokayanti. Brahma Samhita says just that. The pure devotees see the Lord within the heart. Yes. And the Lord, although he has no duty to perform, nothing to aspire for or try to achieve, but he's always busy looking after the devotees, always taking care of them. And even on the advanced level, in some cases, Prabhupada points out in the middle of the purport, that the devotees, the devotees are under the direct care of the Lord, and the Lord voluntarily puts himself under the care of the devotees only. Not the non-devotees. They're under the laws of material nature. They're not under Krishna's personal care and supervision like the devotees. So, so therefore Vyas and the other sages there, they're all devotees. So they chanted Vedic hymns to glorify the Lord, to please him. Yes. And then they, after performing whatever rites they wanted to perform, they all left. And 48, thereafter Maharaj Yudhisthira went to his capital, Hastinapur, accompanied by Lord Sri Krishna, and there he consoled his uncle and wife, Gandhari, who was an ascetic renunciate. She was. And her husband, Dhritarashtra, was not. He was not an ascetic. He was just, he was a bit of a space case, frankly. So anyway, Maharaj Yudhisthira, so that they didn't come for the funeral. They, meaning Dhritarashtra and Gandhari, they didn't come for the funeral for who knows what reason, but anyway, they didn't. So now, though, they're under the care of Yudhisthira. Yes. So they, of course, they are very upset due to losing all their sons. They had 100 sons. So Yudhisthira came back and consoled them. Very nicely. And when they heard that Bhishmadev had also passed away, because they didn't know, it only happened just now. So then that was another shock for them, Prabhupada says. Another great shock. So, therefore, Yudhisthira and Lord Krishna, Yudhisthira being conscious that now they're under my care, so it's my duty to help them get through this whole very difficult situation. So, as Prabhupada says here, he at once hurried to the spot with Lord Krishna to satisfy Dhritarashtra and Gandhari with kind words. Both himself and the Lord also said some nice things. Yeah, and then the second paragraph, Gandhari, Prabhupada explains, she was a very powerful ascetic. Even though she's living the life of a faithful wife, actually she was so faithful that when she found out that she was being married to a blind man, she just voluntarily blindfolded herself and remained like that for the rest of her life. That sort of faithfulness is really quite extraordinary. But that's Gandhari. And Prabhupada makes very interesting point, and I'd say very important point here in the second paragraph. A wife's duty is to follow the husband cent per cent. Therefore she blindfolded herself. I mean, you know. Anyway, ladies, those ladies who are listening, who are watching, listening, it's something for you to meditate on. It's not easy because the husband, you know, today's husbands, they sometimes leave a little bit to be desired. But so did Dhritarashtra. So did Dhritarashtra. Gosh. But even though he was such a mess of a king, but she still followed him. Yeah, so please meditate on that. And Prabhupada makes the point that, you know, she's a great ascetic, and she was shocked. It was very difficult for her as a woman to hear about the death of all of her sons. But still she carried on. Prabhupada concludes the purport. Gandhari, although a woman, is no less than Bhishma Dev in character. They're both remarkable personalities in Mahabharata. That's something, isn't it? So, okay, verse 49. After this, the great religious king Maharaj Yudhisthira executed the royal the royal power in the kingdom, strictly according to the codes of royal principles approved by his uncle and confirmed by Lord Sri Krishna. So, in other words, Maharaj Yudhisthira would refer to Duryodhana sometimes in the process of making decisions. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada, there's a purport here, I think it's 3 paragraphs. And basically Prabhupada describes in the first paragraph how Yudhisthira performed the duties, the real duties of a real king, of a real head of state, so nicely. And he says, Yudhisthira was not a mere tax collector. It's pathetic, actually. It's pathetic. The current rulers. So, yeah, he was always doing his duty in so many ways. And particularly, ultimately, for the people, as much as humanly possible, to go back to Godhead. Yeah. So, second paragraph. So all these Kshatriya royal principles described in the first paragraph I mean, you can go through them all yourselves in detail. Eustace followed them strictly, as we'll see in the next chapter. And Prabhupada mentions in the second paragraph how Dhritarashtra and Krishna were giving advice and Eustace was asking for advice. Of course, he would ask advice from Dhritarashtra, but then he would go and get confirmation from Krishna and make sure, everything's okay. Because you never know. With Dhritarashtra, sometimes his advice may not be the best. And I want to read the last paragraph because it's really interesting. I mean, it's very explicit, about the duties of a king. Maharaj Yudhisthira is the ideal monarch, and monarchy under a trained king like Maharaj Yudhisthira is by far the most superior form of government, superior to modern republics or governments of the people by the people. The mass of people, especially in this age of Kali, are all born Sudras, basically low-born, ill-trained or untrained, or just trained in the wrong ways. That's even worse. Unfortunate and badly associated. They themselves don't know the highest perfectional aim of life. Therefore, votes cast by them actually have no value. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. So true. And thus persons elected by such irresponsible votes cannot be responsible representatives like Maharaj Yudhisthira. There you go, devotees. That was chapter 9. And now we've got to read. We got to go into chapter 10. Here we go. All right. Okay. All right, chapter 10. It's titled Departure of Lord Krishna, for Dwarika. And devotees here, it's not as long a chapter. I mean, it's a moderate length. It's 36 verses. And we've divided into 4 sections. Section A is we've titled it Maharaj Yudhisthira Rules the World. That's from verse 1 to verse 6. Then section B, Krishna prepares to leave Hastinapur. It's verses 7 to 19. And section C, third section, the ladies of Hastinapur glorify Krishna. That's verse 20 to verse 30. And then finally D, Lord Krishna leaves Hastinapur. Verse 31 to verse 36. So yes, devotees, we will, as we do, we will read the verses for these first 6 verses. Maharaj Yudhisthira rules the world, verse 1 to verse 6. What happened? Sorry. Shonaka Muni asked, after killing his enemies who desired to usurp his rightful inheritance, how did the greatest of all religious men, Maharaj Yudhisthira, assisted by his brothers, rule his subjects? Surely he could not freely enjoy his kingdom with unrestricted consciousness. Yes, so it's another question from Shonika. Shonika has come up with many questions as we've made our way through these different chapters. Normally, at least in the majority of cases so far, the first verse of I think all the chapters, or thereabouts at least, is spoken by Sutta Goswami. But here we see Shonika is speaking first. Verse 2, Sutta Goswami said, Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the maintainer of the world, became pleased after re-establishing Maharaj Yudhisthira in his own kingdom, and after restoring the Kuru dynasty, which had been exhausted by the bamboo fire of anger. Wow. Heavy verse. Verse 3. Maharaj Yudhisthira, after being enlightened by what was spoken by Bhishma Deva and Lord Sri Krishna, the infallible, engaged himself in matters of perfect knowledge, because all his misgivings were eradicated. Thus he ruled over the earth and seas, and was followed by his younger brothers. Verse 4. During the reign of Maharaj Yudhisthira, the cloud showered all the water that people needed, and the earth produced all the necessities of man in profusion. Due to its fatty milk bags and cheerful attitude, the cow used to moisten the grazing ground with milk. Wow, that's beautiful, isn't it? Anyway, I sort of got ahead of myself, I'm afraid. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, verse 2. Let's go back to verse 2. Sutta Goswami said, Lord Sri Krishna. Oh, well, actually, no. Back to the first verse. That, well, Shonika is speaking, as we noted. Yudhisthira, most religious person, didn't want to fight, but he did so only out of duty. Yes, Hastinapur was his rightful inheritance. And as we know, although it's all been settled now, he felt very disappointed about all the people being killed in the battle. So verse 2, Sutta Goswami said, Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the maintainer of the world, became pleased after re-establishing Maharaj Yudhisthira in his own kingdom, and after restoring the Kuru dynasty, which had been exhausted by the bamboo fire of anger. So Srila Prabhupada makes important point in the first paragraph that, in fact, it's the purport. It's the whole purport is just one paragraph, it seems. The world's compared to a forest fire, which is caused by, different things, but classically by the rubbing of bamboos. And it takes place automatically because bamboos rub, doesn't need someone to rub them together. So you can say there's no external cause. Anyway, something like that. So similarly, in this material world, oh gosh, the anger of the materialists who want to lord it over. These different angers of different people interacts. And in this way, the fire of war takes place and wipes out so many, Prabhupada says, unwanted population, sort of, with respect, unqualified people. And it's not, these things happen, but they're nothing to do with the Lord. It's just people's karma and that sort of thing. I mean, he oversees and permits, but he would rather the people take to self-realization, take to Krishna consciousness, and come back home, back to Godhead, back to him. So Srila Prabhupada makes the point here in the purport. Where is it now? The battle of Kurukshetra was fought according to the plan of the Lord, so that undesirable persons could get out of the world and a peaceful kingdom under his devotee could be established. Yeah, this is the whole idea behind the material creation. And people who don't realize that, they suffer the pangs of material life. And therefore, the Lord wants his representatives to rule, of course. And Prabhupada says, therefore the Lord was fully satisfied when Maharaj Yudhisthira was on the throne and Maharaj Parikshit was saved. Right, so verse 3, Maharaj Yudhisthira, after being enlightened by what was spoken by Bhishma Deva and Lord Sri Krishna, the infallible, engaged himself in matters of perfect knowledge, because all his misgivings were eradicated. Thus he ruled over the earth and seas, and was followed by his younger brothers. You know, that's a powerful team. That's a really powerful team. Yudhisthira and his brothers. So Prabhupada makes the point that what they call, in extremely technical terms, the law of primogeniture was applied in Vedic times. The law of inheritance by the firstborn. Yes. So the emperor, the king of Hastinapur, was the emperor of the world, and his Yudhisthira, so Yudhisthira was emperor, his brothers were his ministers, etc. There was full cooperation. It wasn't like just nepotism, but they actually did everything brilliantly. Yes. They were his ministers and commanders of state, and there was full cooperation. So he, as Prabhupada mentions here, Yudhisthira, was ideal and comparable to Lord Indra. Yes. And even the demigods, different demigods have their particular planets which they're kings of. Indra, Chandra, Surya, Varuna, Vayu. So Maharaj Yudhisthira was one of them. He was on their level, ruling over the earth. And of course, Prabhupada makes the point, Yudhisthira was not a typically unenlightened political leader. Gosh. So under the direction of Bhishma and the Lord, Yudhisthira was fully equipped with knowledge to do everything very nicely. So then Srila Prabhupada goes into a whole, well, I mean, a fair amount of elaboration about, the modern elected heads, they're like puppets because they don't have real authority. If they want to do something, generally they have to ask many people. And then, of course, if they do something that the people in general don't like, eventually they get booted out. Yes, due to the constitutional position. And therefore, Prabhupada makes the point, there's so much quarreling between states, ideological differences and selfish motives. Oh, Krishna. So Yudhisthira, he had no ideology of his own. I mean, his ideology was Krishna consciousness. He just followed the instructions of the Lord. And those principles, of course, are infallible, universally applicable to everyone. And Prabhupada makes interesting point that a one world state can only be fulfilled if we follow the infallible authority, means if we follow Lord Krishna. Only the perfect and infallible can make arrangements, create a program which is applicable at every place and can be followed by everyone. Yes. And it's meant to be that the king is meant to actually rule, not the impersonal government. And if the king is perfect, the government's perfect. If the person's a fool, the government is a fool's paradise. Yeah. And Prabhupada makes the point, there's so many stories of imperfect kings or executive heads. There's just so many. Oh gosh, it's amazing actually. Therefore the executive head must be a trained person like Maharaj Yudhisthira. And Prabhupada says, must have autocratic power to rule. So a world state can only happen under the regime of a perfect king like Maharaj Yudhisthira. Frankly, I don't know where we're going to get one of them from, but otherwise we just sort of have to carry on and do our best under the really remarkable circumstances. Okay, so now we come to verse 4. During the reign of Maharaj Yudhisthira, the clouds showered all the water that people needed, and the earth produced all the necessities of man in profusion. Due to its fatty milk bags and cheerful attitude, the cow used to moisten the grazing ground with milk. What a beautiful description. Amazing. Yeah, so Prabhupada makes the point that the basic principle of economic development is land and cows. And to emphasize this point, he puts land and cows in italics. Yeah. So the necessities, he lists out the necessities of human society. Food, grains, fruits, milk, minerals, clothing, wood, etc. You don't need all the industrialization, etc. And certainly Prabhupada says, you don't require flesh and fish or iron tools and machinery. You don't require those things. So, there's also a verse in the 9th canto, you may be familiar with it, about Lord Ram and the kingdom of Lord Ram, that same types of conditions, but it's explained in a little more detail and a little more dramatically too, that there was no anxiety at all, no sickness. People didn't even have to die if they didn't want to. Really, very amazing situation. So, during Yudhisthira's reign, there were regulated rainfalls. Anyway, I'm sure you've read what happens nowadays. You know, they've been having these huge droughts in the northern hemisphere, absolutely massive droughts. And then suddenly there's massive rainfall, not regulated, steady, and, beneficial, but first of all, they get so fried and dried up by the sun that things just start bursting into flame, and it's just too much. Then suddenly, everyone and everything gets washed away. It's Kali Yuga. It's Kali Yuga, you can say, but it's ultimately really because of the sinful activities of so many people, at least. So yes, during Yudhisthira's reign, there were regulated rainfalls, and in this way all sorts of nice things were produced, foodstuffs and so on. Yeah. So, because King Indra, who's in charge of rain, King Indra is the Lord's servant. So if everything goes on the planet or in a particular place on the planet, then the Lord will be freed, the Lord will be happy, and Indra will therefore be happy, and Indra therefore will supply nice rainfalls, not just total wipeout types of situations. So Prabhupada says, not only do regulated rains help ample production of grains and fruits, but when they combine with astronomical influences, there is ample production of valuable stones and pearls. Yes. So people can live nicely with a nice grains and vegetables and nice milk products and a nice other natural products, silk and cotton, jewels. So why do people need this extreme industrialization, etc.? Right. So there's no need, Prabhupada says, what is the need of an artificial, luxurious life of cinemas, cars, radio, flesh, and hotels? It's so heavy. It's so right. Has this civilization produced anything more than the doggish mentality of quarreling individually and nationally? Has the civilization enhanced the cause of equality and fraternity by sending thousands of men into a hellish factory and the war fields at the whims of a particular man? Wow. I mean, it's amazing. Prabhupada's so much to the point. Okay, so the second paragraph. The cows were happy, and they were, the verse said, the cows were cheerful. They were cheerful. They were happy. Yes, because they're looked after very nicely. And so milk would come out of their udders, and that would sort of fertilize and enrich the grass further. Gosh, it's so auspicious and wonderful. So they should be protected. Prabhupada says, why should men kill cows for their selfish purposes? I mean, it's bizarre, it's horrific, it's just terrible. It's incredible. Why do that when it's just not necessary at all? You can live really nicely. Yeah, nice prasadam, right? Every day is a feast practically. It's amazing. Yeah. And Prabhupada says you can make hundreds and thousands of palatable dishes. So why the slaughterhouses? And then Prabhupada describes what's going to be described in a little while at least, is how Parikshit, when he was actually ruling later on, after Yudhisthira and his brothers and Kunti and Draupadi had all retired and gone to the Himalayas, so Yudhisthira was ruling and he was touring the world to see how things were going on, and he found a Sudra attempting to kill a cow. So the king immediately arrested the butcher and chastised him. Actually, he was going to kill him, and normally he would do that. But the Sudra, who's the personality of Kali Yuga, he appealed for protection. And therefore, Parikshit, spared his life. So Prabhupada says that shouldn't a king or leader protect innocent animals? Is this humanity? Are not the animals of a country citizens also? Then why are they allowed to be butchered in organized slaughterhouses? Are these the signs of equality, fraternity, and non-violence? Well, they're absolutely not. It's ghastly, actually. So, in paragraph 3, just very short little paragraph. So, we're all creatures of material nature in a certain sense. We're combinations of matter and spirit. We are actually spirit, but we're in these bodies and we're just so deeply involved with them. So therefore, as Prabhupada says, we're creatures of material nature. Yes. So, material nature, if we do nicely, if we satisfy the Lord, who's the Father of everyone and everything in the world, then material nature, mother material nature, will produce so much, both for animals and for men, by the grace of the Father Almighty, Sri Krishna. Yeah. So therefore, and the humans, they are, anyway, this is now paragraph 4, sorry. The humans are the older brothers of all other species, more intelligent. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, human civilizations should depend on the production of material nature without artificially attempting economic development to turn the world into a chaos of artificial greed and power only for the purpose of artificial luxuries and sense gratification. This is but the life of dogs and hogs. Verse 5. The rivers, oceans, hills, mountains, forests, creepers, and active drugs in every season paid their tax quota to the king in profusion. What's going on here? Yes. Right. So, purport. Eudister, of course. And this is further description, actually, of the opulence and beauty of how things were when Eudister was ruling completely according to Krishna's plan. So Eudister was under Krishna's, Ajita's protection. So all the rivers and oceans, hills, forests, etc., they all supplied, Prabhupada says, their respective quota of taxes. And the secret of success, how to produce a situation like this, is to take refuge under the protection of the Supreme Lord. Yes, without his sanction, nothing is possible. So all this industrialization and everything is just, it's certainly not all, as Prabhupada says, because it's unsanctioned. And therefore, the situation is very unfortunate. So, all these rivers and oceans and forests and hills and drugs, they're not our creations, they're creations of the Lord. And if we follow the instructions, live according to the plan of the Lord, then we can use those things in his service and use the remnants as prasadam. Yes. So, therefore, God consciousness has to be introduced. Prabhupada says God consciousness and the perfection of life. In short, the ideology of God, of godly communism. How's that? The world has to again follow in the footsteps of Yudhisthira and Maharaj Parikshit. Then there'll be enough of everything for the world. Yeah. And everything will be supplied. It's amazing. Prabhupada says, the control of the Lord is everywhere. And if the Lord is pleased, every part of nature will be pleased. The river will flow profusely to fertilize the land. The oceans will supply sufficient quantities of minerals, pearls, and jewels. The forest will supply sufficient wood, drugs, and vegetables. And the seasonal changes will effectively help produce fruits and flowers in profuse quantity. Right. So, and Prabhupada makes the point, it's such a good point, that the industrialized society will produce success for a few, but the mass will be unhappy. And Prabhupada concludes the purport, we must look into the defects of the modern civilization by comparison here, and should follow in the footsteps of Maharaj Yudhisthira to cleanse man and wipe out anachronisms. Yeah, anachronisms. So verse 6, because of the kings having no enemy, the living beings were not at all disturbed by mental agonies, diseases, or excessive heat or cold. It's really amazing, isn't it? It's just like, practically, when Lord Ram was ruling. There's not mention of people not having to die unless they want to, but everything else is definitely there. Oh, so Prabhupada again, he gets into it preaching strongly. To be non-violent to human beings and to be the killer or enemy of the poor animals is Satan's philosophy. Wow. Wow. And the reaction is war, cold or hot war. And that we see. I mean, how much of that is going on? It's amazing. It's just amazing. I remember a few years ago, people thought when communism collapsed, people thought now we're going to live in peace. Haribol. Wishful thinking. Right. So, everything's so disunited. There's always strain of, interpersonal, international anxieties and aggressions and all that. But in the time of Maharaj Yudhisthira, there were no different nations. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. There were not really different nations, although there were different subordinate states. The whole world was united. And the Supreme Head, being a trained king like Yudhisthira, kept all the inhabitants free from anxiety, disease, and excessive heat and cold. So they weren't just economically well off, they were physically fit, undisturbed by, natural conditions, the weather and all these things, not disturbed by other living beings being inimical, and they weren't disturbed by bodily and mental problems. And Prabhupada says, there's a saying, there's a proverb in Bengali that a bad king spoils the kingdom and a bad housewife spoils the family. Listen to that, ladies. I mean, that's a really important point to note. It really is. So therefore, because Yudhisthira was a devotee and obedient to the Lord, recognized agent of the Lord, so all the citizens were protected by the Lord. And Prabhupada makes a very important point. Unless one is pious and recognized by the Lord, he cannot make others happy who are under his care. Yeah. Then, if he's pious, recognized by the Lord, and under the shelter of the Lord, then there'll be full cooperation between man and God and man and nature. Yes. And this is all exemplified by Maharaj Yudhisthira. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.